Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing It Came From the Network. Topic of this It Came From the Network, the very last WCW Monday Nitro from March 26, 2001, marked on Peacock as Season 7, Episode 13. If you haven't seen my shows before, I grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. Let's jump right in. We start off with Vince McMahon on a WCW show, basically says he's bought his competition. By the end of the show, he's going to do a simulcast from Raw in Cleveland to tell everybody the fate of WCW. Great opening Vince promo. There's a couple really good Vince promos on this. Some of the classic Vince McMahon stuff there, and we'll get into that as we go along. That's followed with the first actual thing at Nitro, which is at Panama City Beach, which I always loved the Panama City Beach episodes. I think they were a lot of fun. I'd like to see maybe AEW try and do this and recreate that, or even WWE. That's the one thing I really liked about WCW. They would try different things like having wrestling on the beach or wrestling at Sturgis. We get a promo from the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who basically says if WCW is going out, let's go out like we came in. Let's give them the biggest feud and the best match in WCW history, the best rivalry. Ric Flair versus Sting one more time for the main event. Pretty awesome. Pretty great looking back at this and just knowing how important this was. I remember sitting and watching this live and not really fully grasping the magnitude of what was about to happen. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest seismic changes in the history of professional wrestling, was Vince McMahon buying WCW. And even though you knew it happened then, you didn't quite understand how it was going to end up. That's followed up our first match. This is also Night of the Champions. U.S. Champion Booker T against Scott Steiner in a winner-take-all situation. This was a really good match, probably my second favorite match of the show, and I'll cover the other one when I get there. I just love how Booker T and Scott Steiner would wrestle each other. Their styles were so conducive to do anything. They could do a high-flying match, a strength match, a brawling match, and they would incorporate all of that into the same match. These guys, I think, in my opinion, never put on a stinker against each other, even going back to the Harlem Heat Steiner Brothers days. Booker does pick up the win here. I'm giving this one a 4. I thought this was really good. Then we get another promo with Vince. He's in the back talking on the phone to what's his lawyer. That's followed up with a 3-way for the number 1 contendership of the Cruiserweight Tag Team Championship. We get the Young Dragons, Jimmy Wang Yang and Kaz Hayashi, going up against 3 Count, Evan Courageous and Shannon Moore, and the Filthy Animals, Rey Mysterio Jr. at the time, and Billy Kidman. Fun fact about this, at this point, Rey Mysterio had already cemented somewhat of a legacy in the business. He's the same age here, pretty much, as Dom Mysterio is now. So we look at Dom like he's a young star on the rise, when Rey, at the same age, 26, had already had multiple Cruiserweight Championships, Tag Team Championships, fantastic feuds, one of the most historic matches in WCW history, all under his belt. This is a really fun 3-way dance. I enjoyed it. It kind of showed a little bit of what would be the style of tag team wrestling to come for the next 20 years. Basically, the style that's in favor now, the ultra high-paced, really fast, high spots type match. This was a really fun match. Mysterio and Kidman, the Filthy Animals, pick up the win. I'm giving this one a 4. Then we get another segment with Vince McMahon. This one, part of a couple that didn't really age well, in my opinion. It's Vince McMahon and Trish Stratus, who at the time he was cheating on Linda McMahon with. Again, with the accusations that came out last year, I don't know that this aged so well. That's followed up with a Cruiserweight Championship match. Chavo Guerrero Jr. defending against Sugar Shane Helms, who would go on to be Hurricane Helms or Gregory Helms in WWE. This was another really fun match. When people talk about the end of WCW and how bad it got, I don't think they really remember just some of the great matches that were happening, the great influx of young talent like the Young Dragons, the 3 Count, the Filthy Animals were still really young, most of them. Steiner and Booker becoming main event players. People like Awesome and Jindrak, O'Hare, Palumbo, all them getting kind of pushes towards the end of WCW here. People forget about that in the great matches they were putting on. This is a really fun Cruiserweight match, again, showing off what WCW did better than anybody else. I'm giving this one a 4. Sugar Shane Helms Gallows picks up the win on it. Again, giving it a 4. Next up, we get a promo with Booker T, basically saying he's open for anybody's challenge, so bring it if you want to fight him. That leads us right into Lance Storm coming out to the ring with Mike Awesome to set up their match that's going to happen after the break. They come out, Lance Storm basically asks to play the national anthem of Canada. We go to the break. We come back, we see another Vince McMahon and Trish Stratus, very uncomfortable thing. This time Michael Cole comes in, starts trying to ask Vince some serious questions about what he's going to do with WCW. He kicks him out, basically threatens his job. Then we go into the match, Lance Storm and Mike Awesome going up against Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire for the WCW Tag Team Championship. Again, these are 4 guys that I point to. Now, last year and a half of WCW, they really had a youth movement, and they had an influx of new talent, new guys that were taking over, new top-level talents. I don't think any of these 4 guys ever really got to where they would have in WWE if WCW stayed open. I could have easily seen all 4 of these guys becoming WCW champions. They were on that trajectory. They all go to WWE with not as much success. I thought this was a good match. Not quite as good as the 3 before it. Palumbo and O'Haire pick up the win here. I'm giving this one a 3. That's followed up with another one of the Natural Born Thrillers. Sean Stasiak going up against Bam Bam Bigelow. The stipulations say if Bigelow wins, he gets to tattoo Stasiak. The most important thing of this match, in my opinion, and the thing that probably everybody liked at the time, Stasiak was accompanied by Stacy Keibler, Hall of Famer Stacy Keibler, who in my opinion, and a lot of people I know's opinions, is one of the most attractive women that has ever lived, basically, and seemed to have a great personality, seemed to be really fun. Who didn't love seeing Stacy Keibler? She ends up being the highlight of the match, and I'm a big Bam Bam Bigelow fan. We see here why Stasiak never really caught on. This was kind of a bumbling, almost botch-heavy match, but not so much with the botches. It just kind of felt clunky. Stasiak picks up the win after basically Stacy Keibler gets involved. I'm giving this one a 2, my least favorite match of the show. Then we go into another segment yet again with Vince McMahon. This time he's talking to William Regal, who's talking about basically downplaying WCW. That leads us right into a promo with Diamond Dallas Page thanking WCW and its fans. That brings us back to Vince, who's there alone again. This time he hangs up the phone saying it's almost time for me to go. Then we go from that right into our Cruiserweight Tag Team Championship match. Rey Mysterio and Kidman going up against Elix Skipper and Kid Romeo. Again, another 2 great talents who didn't really get that chance. Skipper had some good stuff in TNA, but TNA really wasn't on the radar that he should have been. Kid Romeo had a couple little things both in TNA and WWE. 2 great younger talents which would have, in my opinion, benefited from WCW being around. Ultimately, Kidman and Mysterio pick up the win here to win the Cruiserweight Tag Championship. This wasn't quite as good as the 3-way earlier. I'm giving this one a 3. Next up, we get a backstage promo with Sting, basically accepting the match with Ric Flair. That's followed up with Vince McMahon coming down the hallway to come out and address the crowd. Then we get our main event of the show, Sting versus Ric Flair one more time, and I love this. This was awesome. Was this the best Ric Flair Sting match? Absolutely not. Was it a Ric Flair versus Sting match? Yes. Did you get to see 2 of the greats of WCW go at it one last time in a really good match, a really well-worked match? And I think both of the guys were dealing with injuries at the time. I absolutely love this. This was my favorite match of the show. The spectacle, the fact that it's Sting and Ric Flair. Looking back now, seeing how much it means now, even then it meant a lot because this was WCW. Ric Flair and Sting, they are WCW. Not knowing that basically WCW would be dead within a year or so, it didn't have as much gravitas as it does now, but it really stands out on this show. Just a fantastic match. Ultimately, Sting picks up the win. They shake hands and hug at the end. I'm giving this one a 5. I thought it was absolutely awesome. We close out the show with Vince McMahon coming to the ring, basically saying he bought his competition. He does a poll with the fans, asking them if they want Hogan, if they want Goldberg, Buff Bagwell, Scott Steiner, Booker T, Sting, Lex Luger. The one thing I think they cut from this, and I definitely remember this because I've talked about this with other people over the years, there was definitely a backstage segment where Vince McMahon fired Jeff Jarrett. And I could have swore there was also one where he fired Lex Luger too. They weren't here on this version, I know it was there. If you remember that, put it down in the comments. Let me know if you remember that as well. I know it happened. I know at least Jarrett did. I thought Luger did as well, but Luger may have been the thumbs up, thumbs down part. But I know there was a backstage segment where he fired Jeff Jarrett. Vince keeps going on, basically saying Ted Turner has to deliver me the contract for me to sign it. Then we get the No Chance music, which I forgot that at this time they both were using it, Shane and Vince. Shane comes out, but he comes out in Panama City in Nitro. He goes to the ring. We get the famous ending that everybody in the world knows now, where he says there's a McMahon on the contract, but it's not Vince McMahon, it's Shane McMahon. Just an iconic finish, and if the battle of WCW versus WWE or WWF at the time would have been more competitive, would have been a better fight, would have been more even if WCW would have stuck around, this would have looked at as the jump off for the new WCW, basically. Ultimately, again, it was great for what it was, for that vacuum, for that moment. Fantastic work by both Vince and Shane McMahon. Just a cherry on top of the sundae. Looking back at this retrospectively, it's hard to look at this and not feel disappointed, feel heartbroken that WCW went out the way it did, because WCW wasn't perfect. There was a lot of mistakes that were made, but it was a fun show, and it was different, and they tried things. They had cruiserweights. They had stars that WWE would never push. Lance Storm. DDP didn't really get a good chance at WWE. Booker T, you could say, got held back a bit. He got held back a lot, to be honest with you. It's just, knowing what would come after this kind of clouds my judgment on this. I love seeing the show. It is so nostalgic, and I can remember this show like it happened yesterday. We're talking about something that happened 20 plus years ago, 22 years ago now. And I remember it like I just watched it last week. One of the great moments in wrestling TV history. For that reason, I'm going to give the sum of the parts more than some of the show. There was some, clunkiness, some badness on the show. But what's WCW without a little bit of greatness, a little bit of bad, a little bit of good, some young people, some cruiserweights? It engulfs everything WCW was. Overall, I'm giving the show a 5. I thought it was fantastic. I highly recommend seeking this out if you've never watched it, just to see one of the most historic nights in pro wrestling history and how it went down. And I'm thinking, and I said this last week because I did the first Nitro last week, maybe next week I'm going to do the Raw that happened the same night. Then the simulcast from the Raw side to see how that was, because honestly, I was a person who would flip back and forth between the two. I don't remember much that happened on Raw that night. All my memories that night are vividly from WCW, so maybe I'll go back and watch Raw. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see, if you'd like to see me review the Raw that happened at the same time on the same night next week. With all that being said, like I said, I'm giving it a 5. Let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see that little thing that says join down there, that's how you become a member. Becoming a member definitely helps the show. It helps me get new supplies for the show, get new equipment. Hopefully one day I can turn this fun little hobby into my actual job, and by becoming a member that would help with that. But anyway, while you're there, let me know down in the comments, would you like to see Raw from this night? Yes or no? Maybe. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another It Came From The Network.